Gemini-3 was the first manned flight in the program, piloted by Virgil Gus Grissom and John Young. They tested a new maneuverable spacecraft and conducted the first orbital change by any piloted spacecraft. During Gemini-3, the F-1 rocket engine was invented, which delivers over 1.5 million pounds of thrust. Gemini-4 was flown by James McDivitt and Edward White, and they were the first to perform an American spacewalk. Gemini-5 was designed to last 8 days, which was the longest any of the crews had been there in space at that time. Gemini-5 was piloted by Pete Conrad and Gordon Cooper. After Gemini-5, Gemini-6 and 7 met each other in orbit, with Gemini-6 being piloted by Walter Schirra and Thomas Stafford, and Gemini-7 being piloted by Frank Borman and Jim Lovell. After they met in orbit, Gemini-7 demonstrated a controlled re-entry into Earth's atmosphere. Gemini-8 was flown by Neil Armstrong and David Scott, and their mission was to perform a rendezvous and then 4 docking tests with the Agena target vehicle. Gemini-9, piloted by Thomas Stafford and Gene Cernan, demonstrated rendezvous and docking techniques that would be used in future Apollo missions. Gemini-11 was piloted by Pete Conrad and Richard Gordon, and they conducted the first computer-controlled landing, as well as employing passive attitude stabilization, also known as artificial gravity.
Apollo 1 was on a pretest with all 3 astronauts inside. However, due to oxygen flow difficulty, Apollo 1 was forced to go boom boom. Apollo 5 was the first lunar module test flight, with its objectives to try and test its descent and ascent stages. Apollo 7 and was successful in making an 11-day orbit around the Earth, and it had the first live broadcast of people in space. Apollo 8 was the first flight to make it around the moon and back, along with 10 revolutions of the Earth. Apollo 11, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin. It was the first landing on the moon.
2 days into the Apollo 13 mission, there was an explosion in one of the oxygen tanks. The astronauts survived this explosion, but had to return to Earth without landing on the moon as scheduled. For the Apollo 15 mission, the lunar module was redesigned to hold a much greater payload and remain on the moon for longer than previous missions. Mariner 4 achieved the first successful Mars flyby. Surveyor 1 performed the first successful American soft landing on the moon, which paved way for the Apollo 11 moon landing, and Mariner 4 was the first spacecraft to orbit Mars. Soviets have made advances for Mother Russia. In 1965, cosmonaut Alexei Leonov made first spacewalk. In March 1966, Venera 3 is first spacecraft to land on Venus. In April 1966, Luna 10 is first spacecraft into lunar orbit. In 1970, Luna 16 is first automated lunar sample retrieval mission. In 1971, Soviets launched first space station. All of these missions prove that we are better than capitalist pigs.